Welcome back to school, everyone. I'm excited to see you back. I'm going to share a little bit about my summer. My first trip of the summer was driving across country with my husband. We drove all the way from Connecticut to Portland, Oregon. It was about 3,450 miles. While in St. Louis, Missouri, we visited the Gateway Arch. On the left side, you can see a picture of the pod that we took a ride in to the top of the arch. The arch is 630 feet tall. This was me squeezed into the pod that you had to take to the top of the Gateway Arch. I couldn't even sit up straight. This is the view of the city of St. Louis from the Gateway Arch. You can see the baseball stadium where the St. Louis Cardinals play. On our cross-country drive, we made a stop in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I had lunch with Mrs. Ziegler, who used to teach first grade at Walcott. We stopped in Topeka, Kansas to visit the Brown v. Board of Education National Historic Site. This is the site of a school that was involved in the Supreme Court case that ended segregation in schools. Another place we visited was the Crazy Horse Memorial in South Dakota. They are working on carving this giant statue into a mountain. This is what it will look like when it's finished. From there we drove to Yellowstone National Park and stayed in this cabin. I saw my first moose on the way to Yellowstone. We also saw bison, and we got to take 2 tours in these yellow buses made in 1937. Yellowstone was one of the country's largest national parks, and it was the first one ever created. It has so many different things that you can see, including this Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. It is most famous for the geyser you see here called Old Faithful. On our way out of Yellowstone, we drove through Grand Teton National Park. Then, the last week in July, I flew across the ocean to England and studied for a week at the University of Oxford. This is the front door to Mansfield College, which is where I studied for the week. This is also part of the college where we held some of our classes. The top floor is the library. This is the inside of the library. This was one of the buildings where we ate dinner. This is the formal fancy dining room. We had 2 dinners here, but I wanted to eat here every night because it was so beautiful. There were a lot of different teachers, but these are all librarians from my study group. The librarian in the middle actually works in Connecticut as an elementary school librarian also. This is our whole study group of librarians, including our instructor. This day we were working in a library that included a lot of old books. This is an example of how they used to chain books to the bookshelf so people wouldn't walk away with them because books were very expensive to make. We were learning about a lot of really old books, including this book. It's called Oliver Twist, and it's by a famous author named Charles Dickens. This book is so old and rare, it's worth about $20,000. This book is called a hornbook. It was used to help kids learn to read and write. It was called a hornbook because the piece of paper was attached to a piece of wood and covered with an animal horn to protect the paper from getting messed up. One activity we got to do during the week was to use an old-fashioned printing press. This is how they used to make all books. Before there were computers or typewriters, you had to use these little pieces of metal and put them together to make words and sentences. This would be turned into a book or a paper. You had to do what is called setting the type, which I've done here. The tricky part is you have to do it upside down and backwards. That made it really difficult. Once all your type is together, it looks like this. You then have to use some tools and blank spaces to hold it tightly together so it won't move when you're using the printing press. You then have to get ink on it. It's not like a printer now. You have to take this gooey black stuff, roll it onto a table, and then carefully roll it over your letters. You don't want to put too much or too little, or it will mess up your page that you're printing. We got to do other activities not related to books. We did this activity, which is called punting. Someone has to stand up in the back of this special boat and use that really long metal stick to push the boat along. It was easy sitting in the boat, but it was really hard to push the boat. We also had time to go exploring in the city, including climbing to the top of this tower where I could see the tops of all the different buildings. Another place I went exploring is a college called Christ Church. It's not a church, it's a college, and it's very famous for something. It's very famous for being used as a filming location for the Harry Potter movies. These are the front steps for the entrance to Hogwarts. This is the dining hall that served as the inspiration for the dining hall in Harry Potter. I thought the ceiling was really interesting. This is another location for filming Harry Potter, but it is actually part of the Bodleian Library, which is where I studied for part of the week. For the last trip of the summer, I went back to England. This time I went to London. I was lucky enough to go see the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. This is the outside of the famous theater where it played. The tickets for this play are sold out over a year in advance. I bought my tickets in the summer of 2016. We weren't allowed to have our phones on during the play, but this is what the stage looked like before the show started. I also went to visit Kensington Palace, which is a place where many kings and queens and princes and princesses have lived, including William and Kate. I like to buy antique teacups. Antique means something is very old. This one is from 1897, so it's well over 100 years old and was celebrating Queen Victoria. While I had a great summer, I'm excited to see everyone back at school, share lots of great books with you, and have lots of learning adventures.